I don't know how many of you guys and ladies were at the Sunday night event, but that was really, I don't know what the ladies, how their was, but I know the guys had a really good meal. So sorry, ladies. Y'all did too? Okay, well, that's good. All right, Mr. Charles, it's yours.
Let's see. I was glad in a way that Pastor John asked me to give a testimony, and what I call it is my journey, 2024. But I'll be honest with you, Satan has really been working on me and trying to tell me that I didn't need to get up here and share any of this. And it's been hard, but I've tried my best to write everything down that God did for me last year. But it didn't just start last year. It really started back in 2000 when they discovered that I had an aneurysm in my abdomen, an abdomen aorta aneurysm, also known as a AAA. At the time that they diagnosed I had it, I had an ultrasound done, and it was only 2 centimeters. So they told me not to worry about it, which I didn't. But then in 2011, Dr. Henderson, who I was going to at the time, was going over my chart, and he saw that the aneurysm was there and decided he wanted to have it rechecked. So he scheduled me for another ultrasound, which I went and had done, and went back to see him, thinking, hey, this is going to be okay again. But needless to say, he told me that this aneurysm had grown to 5.3 centimeters. And it was at the point that I needed to see a surgeon. So he referred me to Dr. Mark Sinnen, a surgeon in Newbern. So I went and visited with Dr. Simmons, and he told me that he could not do any surgery or anything to me until I had a stress test. And I thought, well, man, why do I need a stress test? I feel good. But, I'm going to follow the doctor's instructions. So I scheduled a stress test at the Heart Center there in Newbern, and thought everything would be fine on that. Went back to work on Monday, came home Monday for lunch, and had a recording on my answering machine back in 11. They wanted to see me. That's something regarding the stress test that they took didn't look right, so they wanted to go farther. Well, make a short story out of this. They found out that I had blockages, and I had to go and have 6 bypasses done in 2011. And through all of that, I went back and had my aneurysm repaired in April of 2012. Thought everything was fine. Was scheduling to go play some golf. Got a call from my heart surgeon that he wanted to see me. So I went to see him, and he told me I had blockages in my carotid artery. So I let him schedule me for that and got that taken care of. Things was going good. I was going every 6 months to 12 months, getting CT scans for my aneurysm, and it continued to grow. Every time I went, it grew a little larger. And in 2017, Dr. Sinnen decided that he was going to go in again and try to correct and put a new stent in the aneurysm. So he did that. But every CT scan I had every year after that continued to grow. In April of 2024, I went to see him after a scan, and the aneurysm was at that time up to 7.3 centimeters. It had grown 2 whole centimeters from when I went and saw him first in 2011. And at that time, he told me, I've done all I can do for you. I cannot do any more. And he wanted to refer me to Dr. Mark Farber, who's a specialist in Chapel Hill. Well, I really was reluctant to go, not because I didn't want to go, but if you know Judy, Judy is not very good at driving. And I knew that if I went to Chapel Hill, she wouldn't be able to drive. So her getting there and back was going to be very difficult. But I finally consented to going and got in touch with Dr. Farber, got an appointment scheduled for August of 2024. And I was planning on going by myself because we had 2 grandsons at that time that Judy and I were taking care of, and so I knew she could not take time to go with me to Chapel Hill for this consultation visit. So I had planned on going by myself. But one night here at church, Jim Hodges, who I've adopted as my son, in fact, he and my oldest son were about the same age. He came to me at church and says, I want to go with you. I don't want you to have to go to Chapel Hill by yourself. And at first, you know, I didn't want him to put himself out. But he said, yeah, I want to go. So I said, okay. So in August the 23rd, Jim and I drove to Chapel Hill. We left early because I had an early CT scan appointment. Got the CT scan done, went over to the hospital to see Dr. Farber. And I was expecting him to come in and say, hey, I can do this and this and this, but it didn't go that way. And Jim can share with you too. He and I sat in that room and he says, first of all, you have to commit that you're going to come to Chapel Hill for everything. If you're not going to commit to do this, I'm not going to do anything for you. And said, second of all, the devices that has been put in you in 11 and 17 or 12 and 17 has disintegrated. And it's spread all over your body. It has affected your kidneys, it's affected your legs, and you've got 3 options. The first option, I can go in, remove all of these devices, and fix the aneurysm. But he says, you can't survive it. The second option he gave me was, we can go in above your kidneys, clean out all the debris that's in there, but you're going to lose your right kidney, possibly your left kidney, and you'll be on dialysis the rest of your life. He said the third option is we can go in and just remove the device that's in there and put in a new one. He said, I want you to think on it. I said, no, I don't need to think on it. I said, I'm going to take the third option. The first 2 were not something I thought at that time that I wanted to take. So he scheduled my surgery for September the 25th. I had to go back on the 23rd to get some more tests done and all that. So Jim and I drove back on the 25th. And Judy and all of us went up to have the surgery done. The surgery went well. I stayed in the hospital 2 days. And, you know, it's funny as I go think back on this. When I came out of recovery, And they took me down to our first room. Judy was with me. The room that they had assigned me, they couldn't give me. I don't know what happened, but they said they couldn't put us there. So then they took us down to another room, and it was like a room that you put all your clutter in and all. The bed was there, but it had all kinds of stuff in there. But Gina, I told her, hey, we can handle this one night. So we just took it went on. But at one point I had decided, once I got into the hospital, God laid it on my heart that I was going to serve Jesus with everybody that came into my room. I made it a point. I didn't care who it was, whether it was cleaning, whether it was RN or LPN or what. I was going to share Jesus Christ with everyone I saw. And you know, everybody that I shared with, they came back to me and talked with me about Christ. Well, we got out of the hospital after 2 days being there overnight. I went home. Thought everything was good. I went back to work. I was working at Curtis Chevrolet at that time. I went back to work. Was working every day. Had a schedule in October the 31st to go back for a checkup. But during the time I went back to work, I was having a lot of issues. I was having chills. I was having sweats. Felt horrible. But I never, through any of those chills and sweats, did I ever have a temperature. So I didn't know what was causing it. But as I would go to work, I'd force myself to go because I felt like I owed Dean Walgerman, who was my boss, I owed him to go out and do the work. But it got harder and harder to get up. It got harder to do anything. In fact, Dean got so concerned about me, he wanted to drive me home one day because he was afraid I couldn't make it myself. But I told him no, I could do that. So he helped me get in the car. I said I could drive. Most of it in. And he kept trying to get me to call Chapel Hill to move my appointment from the 31st up sooner because he was concerned. But I'm a little on the hard-headed side, I have to admit. And I put it off, and I kept putting it off. No, I'm going to wait. I'll wait. So when the 31st came, I got up early that morning, drove out to Jim's house to pick him up. And normally when we went to Chapel Hill, I would drive up, and Jim would drive back. But that morning I felt so bad. The when I got to Jim's, I crawled out and crawled on the passenger side and said, Jim, you got to drive. I just didn't think I could make it. But we drove to Chapel Hill, got the CT scan done, drove over to see Dr. Farber. Both of my doctors, first name was Mark, by the way. That's the reason sometimes it's hard to say which one. But went over and saw Dr. Farber, and his assistant, Dr. Jenny, came in to talk with us while Dr. Farber was reading the CT. And I was explaining to her all about the chills and the sweats and all the pain that I was having. And she couldn't answer why. And before I went up there, I'd already checked with Dr. Sinnen and Newbern. I'd talked to my cardiologist. I talked to Dr. Henderson, all of them, trying to find out why I was going through sweats, chills, and pain. And none of them could give me an answer. So Dr. Jenny went and got Dr. Farber, and they came back in. And Dr. Farber brought up on his monitor there, the CT, and he was showing us exactly what it looked like and all that. And he said, the good news is, your aneurysm, that's wrong. But the bad news is they still couldn't answer why I was going through these other issues. So Dr. Farber says, have you had your white blood cell count checked? I said, not that I'm aware of. So he scheduled me to go by lab as Jim and I was leaving to get a blood work done. So we did. Got that finished. Jim and I got in the car and we headed toward Morehead. We got within, I'd say 300 yards, stopped at a stoplight before we hit I-40. In fact, if we went through the stoplight, if the stoplight had not caught us, we would have been on I-40. But we're sitting there at the stoplight and my phone rings. And it's Dr. Jenny. She says, don't leave. Turn around and come back. Says, while you're waiting, you go find you something to eat. So Jim and I made a U-turn at the stoplight, went back and pulled in this shopping center looking for a place to eat, and by that time my phone rang again. It was Dr. Jenny. She said, we're going to admit you. We found that you have a serious infection in your abdominal aorta aneurysm. So go ahead and get something to eat while we try to find you a bed. So we did. We went and found, I believe it was a McDonald's, wasn't it, Jim? And had us something to eat. Jim drove me to the hospital, and I'm telling Jim, go ahead, I'll walk on in. You don't need to get out, because I knew he had a long drive ahead of him. But he said, no, I'm going to walk you to your room. And the room they had me was a 2-bed ward. I had another individual in there was trying to get discharged, and here it was. I was so sick I didn't really know what was going on. And Jim saw me in the room. I got into the bed, and I tell you, I was sick. I got to laying there thinking, I don't know if I'm gonna make it. I really don't know if I'm gonna make it. And the sad thing to me was not of dying, because I knew that if I died there, that's where I was going. The sad thing for me is I had nobody there. No family, no friends. I was all alone, except for my Lord and Savior. And that was my sad part. But then the nurse came in to put a port in. And she tried, bless her heart. She did 3 tries. And I mean, I'd never had anybody take that many tries, and I never had anybody try to find, after they got in the arm, find your vein. But she did 3 tries, and she was so sad. And I said, don't worry about it. It'll work out. But she was holding her head down and just about in tears. So she called another nurse in who was supposed to be an expert. First try, got the port in. Well, during that night, about 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, I went into AFib. Hadn't been in AFib, I don't even remember the last time. My heart got up to 140 beats a minute. And it was fluttering, it was doing a little of everything. And the next morning, they'd already scheduled me to have an endoscopy. And they were going to do a deep endoscopy all the way down into my intestines. And I'd never had one that deep before, but they'd planned on that. Well, the doctors came in the next morning and told me they couldn't do it. Unless I got out of AFib and my heartbeat got down way below 140, it was too dangerous for them to do it. So they tried most of that afternoon to get it back in and could never get it in that ward. So they transferred me to critical care unit. on the second floor at Chapel Hill. And that's where I spent most of my time, by the way, on the second floor, same floor. So I transferred up there. They finally got my AFib corrected, my heart rate down, my blood pressure down. So they scheduled me to have the endoscopy. I went down, had it done, was laying in the room there, waking up, and who should I see? David Haskett. He came by and visited me. I said, my, I couldn't believe it. But he visited with me and finally took me back to the room. They started me on antibiotics. I had an infection. To this day, they do not know what the infection was. But they had to give me 10 days of antibiotics before they would even think about doing surgery. So this was first, 2nd of November, and I was scheduled for surgery on the 11th, Veterans Day. So I started going through all kinds of tests because the surgery, if you recall, that they are planning on doing on me. Dr. Farber has already told me, you can't survive it. But he had to do it because the infection was so bad that he couldn't do any other way. So he was doing everything. I had more tests done, and some of them I don't know why they did them, but I went along with whatever they said because I was at their mercy and it didn't matter to me. Some of the technicians that took me down to do these tests said, you know, God was with you during this because we've never had one go this way. We've never had one done the first time through and to be perfect, to give us all the information that we need. I said, well, I've told them all that God is going to be with us regardless whether it's in the surgery or wherever. He's there. And I had told that to Dr. Farber when he told me the chances I had. I said, Dr. Farber, God's going to be in that operating room with you. He's going to guide your hands. He's going to guide everything that goes on in that surgery. And whatever is his will, it will be. But to give you some information about the staff, there was a lot of staff people there that were just awesome. Most of the time, the nurses and the lab technicians and all were different. But I had one lab technician, his name was George. He was a black man. He came to me on several occasions taking blood. And George and I got to sharing and talking, and George says, how long have they told you got to stay? I said, 2 weeks after the surgery. George said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. He said, my brother, who's a preacher, he had a brain tumor. And they told him he was going to have to be here for 7 days. But he was out in 5. And then George looked at me and says, you know, you remind me of my dad, only a little lighter. I said, George, thank you for that. And George, before he left the room, he grabbed my hands and we sort of embraced. And then there was this Filipino nurse, Joy. Joy, she was amazing. She just came on duty and we started to sharing. And Joy said, what is the greatest decision you've ever made? And without any hesitation, I said, Joy, accepting Jesus Christ as my Savior when I was about 10 years old. She said, what's the second? I said, meeting my wife when I was 16. She said, you got any regrets? I said, no. I just wish I could change some of the bad decisions I've made, but no regrets. Now, Joy was a busy lady. Not only was she a nurse there at Chapel Hill, She was a nurse at the Children's Hospital at Duke, and also worked at the VA. And we were sharing Jesus, and I was telling about, at the house we had a Bible study every night with our grandsons, and each of them would read the Bible, and she said, me and my brother do that too. So she started to leave the room, and Joe would turn around and come back and grab me and hug me. To me, that's what Christians do. They love each other in many ways, and they serve Jesus Christ in every way they can. Later on, they came in to install a pig. And I never knew what a pig was, to be honest with you. And a pig was like putting in two ports in one. And they run it through my right shoulder arm, and they ran it through my veins all the way into the center of my chest, right in my heart. And I sat there and watched them. I mean, they had it on a monitor as they were doing it. And the reason for it, the pig could stay in for 6 to 12 months without being removed. So they put the pig in because I was going to be on IV fluids for quite a while, antibiotics and so forth. So on November 11th, they came for my surgery. And I told Judy and everybody that I was on a surgery schedule for 9 that morning. But they had some emergencies come up, and they had to move my surgery up. So, needless to say, I didn't get to see anybody before my surgery. I just went in. But here again, I had more peace about all these surgeries than any time in my life, because I knew my family wasn't with me in that surgery, but I knew God was. So I went in, not knowing where I was going to come out or not, but I knew that God was going to be there with me. So after the surgery, I stayed in here 20 days in Chapel Hill. That was 20 long days. And when I got ready to be discharged, Jim and Gwen were going to pick me up. And they, along with their 2 grandchildren, were over in Concord visiting with Daniel. And it's not easy to come from that area it's not like it's just going by. They came out of their way just to pick me up and save Judy from having to worry about getting somebody to come get me. But they left Concord that morning, and I'd been told I was going to be discharged, but no date was given, no time. And here it is, Jim is on his way, and I'm still sitting there waiting for him to say, hey, you can go home. Jim got to Chapel Hill. They went to lunch and did a little shopping, and talked to him, and he was on his way to Chapel Hill to pick me up. Still, at that point, I had not been officially discharged. And here it is, I'm getting concerned that, am I going to be causing Jim and Gwen to be sitting out there waiting for me? But when Jim texts me, hey, I'm here, I'm outside waiting, they discharged me. And took a few minutes for them to get a transporter to come and take me down. But I thought, man, how amazing God is. Here it was, I was worried to death that I was going to cause Jim inconvenience, and God had already worked it out. I didn't have to worry. So I had scheduled, after this discharge, I was scheduled to come back the 23rd of December for a checkup to make sure the surgeon all was doing well. So, 23rd of December, Jim and I took off again to Chapel Hill. Got a CT scan done. Went and visited with Dr. Rashad. Since Dr. Farber was on vacation he was home in Texas, so Dr. Rashad, who was assistant to him in the surgery, was on look at us. So I went in, Jim and I did, and I was expecting him to say, "Oh, things are great, looks good," and send me home. We got in, he got his monitor on, showing us CT scan, and he said, "I'm sorry to say this, but you got a pseudoaneurysm, also called a false aneurysm." Now, folks, I'm ignorant when it comes to things that I'm not a medical person, but a pseudoaneurysm is an aneurysm inside the aorta. It doesn't protrude outside, it protrudes inside. Where the aorta is supposed to be a little round circle and the blood flowing through it, this was dropping down. And he said, "I don't advise you to leave. I want to admit you immediately. And we're going to do surgery the 26th, day after Christmas." So as heartbroken as I was, I said, "Okay." So laid up there thinking, it's Christmas Day and I'm in the hospital and all that. Well, I got some good things that happened on Christmas Day. Judy came, stayed with me. Albert and Deanna came as they were getting ready to go on a nurse trip. They came by and visited with me. So as bad as it was, it turned out great in those aspects. But then the day came for the surgery on the 26th. And the surgery, when I woke up and recovered, was tough because I was about to freeze to death. I don't know why the temperature had gotten so cold, but I was about to freeze. They had a tube down my throat. I couldn't hardly swallow. But that got over. They got me out and said everything was fine. I just had to go back later for another scan. And when I went back for that scan, I was told that everything was good on my left kidney. The right kidney, there were some probably issues on some of the blood vessels, but he said it was working. They didn't see anything to worry about at this point. It would deal with it down the road. And I said, fine. God didn't want any more surgery. Well, I came back home. Had a home nurse come to the house, taught Judy how to do IV antibiotics. And needless to say, Judy wasn't too happy at first. She was a little nervous about doing antibiotics. But I had to do antibiotics until they could come up with a oral antibiotic that they could give me to try to cure this infection. And in fact, the infectious disease doctors there at Chapel Hill told me that they might never cure it, that I might have to take these antibiotics for the rest of my life there. But things were going well. Then one day the nurse came by, took some blood, took it to the lab, and Dr. Henderson the whole time was getting copies of the lab reports on my blood work. And he called me. He said, man, your triglycerides and all these things are so far out of line, it's unreal. He said, I'm worried about your liver damage to your muscles and all these things. I said, well, Dr. Henderson, my nurse from the infectious disease department is supposed to have a phone call to me today. So he gave me a cell phone and said, when she calls, have her to call me. So she called, and I talked to her and gave her some of the information that he had given me and gave her his phone number. Well, she called him, because about 10 minutes later, she called me back. Says, I want you at the hospital today. I said, can't do that. I said, I can come tomorrow, but I can't come today. So the 15th of January, Jim and I went back to the hospital in Chapel Hill. They told me to come in through the emergency room. So I went in through the emergency room, stayed there for really a day and a half. Time they got me out of the emergency room into a regular bed. And then they had to work, because one of the antibiotics that I was being given was doing the damage. So they had to take me off of that antibiotics and try to find another one to offset it. So I was there for roughly 7 days trying to find a antibiotic that they could give me that would work and give me out. Well, they finally got it sort of tweaked down and getting ready to discharge me. And if you recall, in January, we were having a bad snowstorm that was forecast in the whole Carter County area. And here I'm trying my best to talk them into getting me released so I can beat the snowstorm. Because I knew that I had to have Jim drive all the way from Moorhead, and I didn't want him out driving in bad weather. And I knew if it got too bad, he couldn't come, and then I didn't want to stay up there. So they started to working to try to speed it up. They knew about the storm as well as I, because they kept up with the news. Well, finally, they told me that morning, we're going to let you go today, which was the day before the snowstorm was supposed to hit. So I called Jim. I said, Jim, I can go today. So Jim said he'd be leaving soon. Well, the closer he got, as he kept sending me texts every now and then, I still wasn't released. I still had not been discharged. They had me hooked up to an IV and all these different things, but they had not told me I could go. They were still telling me that home health had not got everything regulated to where they could start back the IV deal again. So here again, I'm getting flustered, I'm getting worried, because the closer Jim gets, the more I'm concerned. Well, Jim gets close enough that he says, I'm just about downstairs. And here it is, the home health nurse says, hey, you can go. I'd already started getting dressed. I was getting that anxious. So as soon as she said that, they took the IV out. My transportation to Kermit Dam was there, and away we went. And here again, God worked it out. No matter how much worry I had, God worked it out. So we got through all this. I got back to see the infectious disease doctors and Dr. Ben Rashad. And they checked out, Dr. Ben Rashad checked out my procedure that he did, and the infectious diseases doctor decided that they could take the pick out and put me on oral antibiotics. And at first they were going to give me 3 500 milligrams of amoxicillin But then they finally broke it down to where I could take 2 500s. So I take 2 500 milligrams of Anamoxin morning and night. And I've been doing that since all this has occurred. Dr. Ben Rashad, for the first time, told me, hey, everything looks good. The mesh that he put in to keep the aneurysm, the pseudoaneurysm from caving in anymore, was doing its job. The blood flow to my kidneys was doing good. So praise God, I was doing well. We came back home and things were really looking good to me. But then March the 30th, my dear wife's birthday, we came to church that Sunday, had the grandkids over for lunch, and late that afternoon, things went sour. I started throwing up, having severe abdominal pains, and Judah was begging me to go to the ER. I'd go lay down, I wouldn't go to the ER. I'd go lay down, get up, walk, lay down, get up, go walk. But pain got so bad, I did get up and get dressed, just in case. But I stayed up all night, and the next morning it had not subsided, so I called Dr. Henderson while Judy was out at Walmart, and he said they had an opening about 11. So Judy got back, and I said, I got an appointment to see Dr. Henderson at 11. So we took off at 10:30. I don't like to be late. So we went down, and as we're driving up, Judy gets a call from Gabby that she's sick and needs her to pick her up, take her home. So I told Judy, I said, you go ahead, I'll go on in, and I'll sit down and wait, and you can hurry back. So while she was going to pick Gabby and carry her home from school, I went in and sat down and called her right back. I didn't waste any time. And as soon as I got into the examining room, the nurse was taking my vitals, and I said, I'm nauseous. So she went ahead and got me a bucket, and I started throwing up again. Dr. Henderson came in, gave me a nausea shot, and called the rescue squad. So here it is. I'm being taken to the hospital with the rescue squad, which was only a block or two away. And get over there, get in the emergency room, stay in the emergency room from about 11:30 to 9. And during that time, still in severe pain, and they gave me a CT scan and said you got a blockage in your bowels. So they finally gave me some morphine to kill the pain and set me up in a room and put an NG tube down there. And Dr. Merritt came in later, wanted to operate on it, and she did on the 3rd. I stayed in the hospital another 7 days. Wanted to have something to eat, but couldn't, so they removed the nose tube. And then I could only have liquid. But finally they came in, took it out, started me on liquid, sent me home. Again, everything seemed to be going well. With all that I've wondered about all the things that I endured, I look back and think about all the opportunities I shared Jesus Christ with the people I come in contact with. And the day I was discharged from Carter Healthcare, my nurse that came in that morning was going through a lot of difficulties. Her brother and other things were going on. And we were sitting sharing, and I said, let me pray for you. And so we sat there and prayed. And after I finished, she knew Timothy Thompson. She also had visited our church. But I felt like that was God's way of using me in her time of need. But you know, in all this wondering why I went through this, I know I had a sister that had cancer that was prayed for, but she passed away at 61. But I contribute a lot of it to the church family here, because I knew and could feel every surgery I went through, I could feel the presence of God with me. And I knew in my heart, and from things I was being shared with, that this church was praying for me and lifting its petitions for me. I know I was being prayed for in Romania for the Fries. I was being prayed for in South Carolina, in Greensboro, and all around. God heard, and God answered. Now I heard Dr. Jeremiah say something, and he was talking about on one of his sermons that as a young pastor, he was doing a lot of flying away from his family. And he said, I got concerned, not that I was afraid to die. I got concerned about leaving my family and my small kids. And he said he had an older preacher tell him this: God's man in the center of God's will is immortal until God is through with him. I feel like God was not through with me yet, and that's the way I'm still here. And I hope that through my testimony that it can touch the lives of other people of what an awesome God we serve. Thank you.